The Security Weekly News is live on Tuesdays and Fridays at 12 o'clock Eastern Time most every week. I try to scan and produce a quick look at some major stories to help you keep up with what's going on in and around the industry in a short format. Myself, Jason Wood, and other guest commentators provide greater insight every week. I'm Doug White, and I hope that you will look for the Security Weekly News in all of your favorite podcast catchers and subscribe for the latest content.
Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Join the Security Weekly Discord server to chat with the hosts, ask questions, customize live stream alerts, and more. Visit securityweekly.com/Discord for the invite. There's even a mentoring section in there that I created. I've done one or two calls with people based on that mentoring channel. So if you pop in that mentoring channel, have some patience because sometimes it takes me a day or two to see it. But I will reach out to you, and at least I'm active in there providing mentoring. If it gets busier, I will rope in my fellow Security Weekly hosts as well. Also, make sure you subscribe to Below the Surface, the podcast by Eclipsium in partnership with CRA. Myself and Scott Schefferman host this show. We've had the pleasure of speaking to some amazing guests. You can find all the episodes at eclipsium.com/podcast, and we're getting ready for another round of 12 episodes. So I am excited about that. You'll see some more internal Eclipsium folks jump on the show this time around. So I'm super excited. Mr. Aaron Leland is here with us. Aaron, welcome.
Good evening or good morning, and good to see you and Larry together. And I really enjoyed the first part of the show. Incident response is quite close to my heart, and I've already been on the GitHub and had a look at the resources. Really cool.
Good stuff, right?
Yeah.
Let's see. For this evening, we'll kind of ease our way into it, I think, and talk about Canon printers. So Canon has been warning people that of the Wi-Fi security risks when discarding inkjet printers.
Or reselling inkjet printers.
Yes, reselling them. Yeah. Reselling is probably, you could find one in the dumpster.
Arguably, if you're thinking about the home consumer market, you're probably disposing of them, because that's the joke about the home printer market, is that like it's usually cheaper to go buy a new printer than it is to buy cartridges.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
I think, they list the models, and I didn't look at the models. Are most of the models like not your average home printer?
They were listed as home office or home small business, but there's also a number of large format printers in there, and they're quote the Pro models.
And basically they store the Wi-Fi details, the SSID and the password.
Yep, and the network types and potentially the last assigned IP addresses and so forth.
Interesting. Yep. So, I had kind of, in my mind, I was like, all right, so your printer that you're reselling or getting rid of in some capacity has the Wi-Fi network password in it, right? Maybe some IP details. I don't think it's a big deal in my mind. Fight me, by all means, fight me on this, but I'm going to take the stance that this is not a big deal. I think you can change your password if you've discovered that it's gone out on a Canon printer somewhere. Also, I think the likelihood of someone using this against you is pretty low. And I'm not saying it's technically infeasible, because if I were to buy a Canon printer, get the Wi-Fi network details, I could use Wiggle. Would I go to Wiggle?
Yep.
Would I go to wiggle.net? Then I could figure out a physical proximity, and probably based on other artifacts on the printer, could be if they didn't remove the asset tag, certainly. If there's any other information that was still stored on there that could give the company name away, I could correlate that with some Google searches on the company name. Oh, they've got an office in where Wiggle has reported this thing, and figure out I could potentially get on that Wi-Fi network. Maybe the password is the same on all the Wi-Fi networks in all the locations across the U.S. Maybe there's one closer to me and I can get on the Wi-Fi network.
Yep.
I still think the probability is kind of low.
I think
we've seen these kind of attacks. You did research, Larry, on SIM cards and other e-waste in general is kind of a whole class where Yes, you can target it, but the probability of that is still pretty low.
I
right?
mean, don't get me wrong. It probably comes to be a crime of opportunity.
Yes.
As opposed to a targeted attack. Now, I want to throw a couple of pieces of information or questions towards your argument. The initial argument was, well, if you're buying this printer for your home or your small office and you throw it away, well, now then you move to sold it, and then it's potentially a larger organization. But if you think back to that home or that small office, and you're throwing it away, and you go out back and you throw it in the dumpster, well, there's your location right there.
Yeah, right.
Right. So that to me takes a little bit of that argument out, depending on the place where it may be installed. Also, yeah, just go change your password. Well, remember what Bill said earlier in the forensic stuff, like. You may assume that like your service provider that's doing your IT in your small business is doing the secure thing, and they threw the printer away because it's bad. But are they changing the password for you?
I don't know what the problem is with the password because it's printed right on the label on the Wi-Fi router.
Well, hopefully they changed that at least. But then you got to see the Wi-Fi router in the organization to get that, Jeff, and so that's a whole other attack.
You know, there's a cloud version of this, right?
Yeah.
This is not a joke. There's actually a cloud version of e-waste. There was a research project, I guess, a couple of years ago, where they were very quickly invoking and then destroying virtual machines in AWS, and in the storage they found data.
Yep.
So they were able to reconstruct data from various companies because it had not been properly scrubbed after the virtual machine was destroyed.
Interesting. So here's another one.
Securityfail.com is very similar. It wasn't storage, but it was.
Yep.
We didn't. If you don't clean up DNS and an IP address gets recycled, someone else could spin up a system with that IP address, and all of a sudden, if you're just listening, you're getting incoming requests. You're like, where are those coming from? You look at the HTTP headers, and you're like, oh. This IP address was associated with an A record an A record actually with this domain, for this domain. So if I configure something, I can receive that
shenanigans,
traffic, right?
Yep. So another one too. Just change the password. Okay. I'll pose that back to you. If you had a inkjet printer with the password on it on your home network, and you're the average consumer, I know you're a little bit more than average consumer. And I tell you, well, change your WPA to pre-shared key. No, change it.
Yeah.
I'll wait.
I'm thinking about that. Like,
I'll wait.
I don't want to, because then I have to reconfigure every single device on my network.
I'll wait. No, seriously, I'll wait.
I don't want to do that.
Yeah. So go ahead.
I don't want to do that.
Go ahead. Go take your little connected device that connects to your TV and go through the password change for your good 16-digit password. With the button with the remote with the one button on it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll wait.
Yeah.
How many TVs you got?
You don't have 802.1x. You don't have 802.1x and Active Directory set up in your house?
You kidding me? You think my TV supports that?
Yeah, sure. Good point.
Right? So
yeah.
And
no, that's a fair point.
And now you even think about the reasonably average, somewhat tech-savvy consumer and about how many devices, including their computers and their iPads and their phones and their cameras and their TVs and their printers and their thermostats they have in their house. In excess of 30 plus devices?
Mm-hmm.
My wife and daughter just went out and got new phones. And you know, I'm sure they didn't do anything to scrub the old phones. So in theory, there's credentials that are in that old phone now that has been recycled back to the phone company.
But most modern iOS and Android devices are encrypted by default, and the passcode to get around that is not, depending on your phone, not trivial.
Correct.
Also,
much better now.
I mean, also you should wipe it before you turn it back in. Also,
don't forget to wipe.
The companies say that they will wipe it before they recycle it. But I never trust that with anything that I'm recycling. And I don't recycle a lot because I'm so paranoid about this was my device and I have my data on it. And I'm like, even if you wipe it, like everyone, most people listening and all of us on the show are like, no, like data isn't really deleted.
Yeah. Speaking of which, it was
forensic recovery is a thing that
yeah. And Josh, I know you have a comment here, but it was actually kind of funny. I played a joke on the kids the other day, especially our youngest, Orion, who does not have a phone yet. And I said that she knows I've been going back and forth to get some cellular stuff for some testing I'm working on. And then I went to the store and I said, I got you a surprise. I got you a new phone. And I pulled out the original iPhone version 1 and handed it to her. Because I had some cellular stuff in a box that had a bunch of SIM adapters
Vintage.
in it. So, yeah.
I had one of those.
That's a collector's item.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it has a cracked screen, and I no longer have a cable I can charge it with.
Yeah, it was the old. That was the old
the
giant.
30,
yeah, it was a giant
30
charger. Yeah.
Yep.
I still have an iPad 1 and a 30-pin cable, and I don't know why I have it anymore.
As soon as you get rid of it, you'll be like, "Oh, I wish I still had that. I have a use."
Seriously,
now, right?
Yep.
But my comment was actually, I recycle all my electronics. They might end up in really small pieces, and I'm recycling them in the metal bin, but I recycle them.
Very nice.
This is true.
Yep.
So anyway, yeah. But those things being said, Larry, in terms of priorities that you have, even as a small business or enterprise, right? This probably isn't a big deal. However, I think it also is a good reminder, based on our conversation we just had, about when you do resell or recycle your electronics, that you should do some deal. I mean, yes, the super paranoid, we will smash it into 1,000 pieces, right? Or we will just like take the storage bits out and we'll just keep the storage bit and just everything else goes and gets recycled. Like I'm taking the hard drive, and hard drives are pretty small, like that SSD. Yeah, it's pretty small. I could have a whole stack of those in my cabinet and they could just stay there. It's fine.
Yeah. Like I think about some of the attacks that I would think maliciously about, like where I'd want to go dumpster diving looking for a printer, like the marijuana dispensaries.
Yes.
Yes, but you're not looking for a printer there. Let's be clear.
This is also true, but but you're looking for bad product or other stuff. But you maybe find a printer there from the IT support folks that are there.
Right.
That'd be a fun network to be on.
Yes,
because of cash transactions and so forth. That could be fun.
That was a nice soft start. Let's move on.
Along those lines, air-gapped ICS systems were targeted by sophisticated malware. Now, the sophistication for bypassing the air gap is not audio pulses from or system fans, right? Or changes in wind speed velocity, flashing hard drive indicator lights. Nope, it's just removable media. It's USB thumb drives. That's how they're bypassing the air gap. It's good old USB thumb drive.
Like, what was it? Natan's facility.
Yes, correct.
Yeah,
it was USB drives.
Yep.
Yeah. That's what I pulled from that one. That we don't.
It's actually funny. I just had a call, an advisory session with a company where they were talking about changing data centers, and I told them about hard drive lights, and they're like, "Wait, what?" I'm like, "Yeah, just tint the glass in your racks," and they're like, "No, hard drive lights. What are you talking about?" And I explained, you can actually pull data off via hard drive lights. And they were like, "No, you can't." So I'm like, "All right, hang on." And I started Googling really quickly, and boom, there it was. I grabbed the article, sent it to them.
Yeah, there's been a couple of research papers, but what I like about your suggestion, Josh, even though we're kind of establishing that usually it's removable media that creates the back channel or the bypasses the air gap, but if you're moving data centers and we know this attack exists. And however, going back to our first story, probably likelihood is really low. However, discovering this kind of attack and potentially the impact of this attack is pretty bad. But the fix is really low cost, especially at this juncture. The fix is just make sure you got some tinted glass.
It's $30 of tint.
Right. If the fix is low cost, me as the CISO or needs to make that, if I'm the decision maker, I'm like, yeah, just do the tinted glass. Why would we leave, even if the likelihood is low, why would we leave this attack vector open if we can fix it pretty low cost, right?
That's
right.
Technically not a fix, Paul. It's a countermeasure.
It's a countermeasure. I agree, Jeff. Yes.
It's a compensating control or countermeasure. I will agree.
It's a countermeasure.
but it's an easy, cheap thing to do, and it guards against people knowing what equipment you're using.
Yeah, it has an added
guards
benefit.
against.
Yep.
Yeah, so why not? And they were like, "Oh, we've never heard of it, but thank you, that's great." And so it's a nice sort of thing to do. And the interesting thing is, when we had a Bill just a little while ago, he was talking about how most of the installations that he goes to are really sort of primitive in security. And I hate to use that word, but primitive is probably the best one I can use. I can use others. But that's one of the reasons that we're here, is to tell people about things they may not know about. Because
Correct.
how many news stories, Paul, you've got probably the best a set of feeds from all of us. How many news stories a day do you get?
It's over 1,000 easily.
And so every week you refine it down into 20 or 30 out of 1,000 a day.
1,000 a day, easily. At that, probably 2,000 or 3,000 a day. Well, some
and
of
people
those
wonder, like, Paul just gets on the air and he talks. Is that his job? My God, what is that's nothing. No, there's a lot of work there. Okay, legit, there's a lot of work there.
It's a constant funnel, and I mean, I'll be transparent. I use Feedly with very curated feeds. If someone reminds me, I can put my OPML file on my website.
Hey, put your OPML on your website.
Remind me to do that, and I'll do that, and you can look at those same feeds. There's a couple of searches and filtering and sorting that I do, but really what I'm looking for, Josh, to your point, is tell me about the stuff that I don't know about in terms of threats, right?
Right.
And not so much like the APT groups and the threat actors, because I see all that stuff, and I actually think that's a totally separate show in and of itself. But I'm looking more for like the threat and research side, right? Who's doing? And along those lines, we had one on the CPU. Another CPU data leak was found. This one is, I think Zenbleed's a way bigger deal than this one, because I ran the Zenbleed attack on one of my CPUs is vulnerable, and absolutely was leaking data from other threads and processes.
Yep. Yeah, you were talking about that last week. Yep.
Right. We talked about Heartbleed. Platypus was one of the other ones. I think that was the first power, measuring power fluctuations.
Okay.
Because I think Sam Bound, with great power comes great leakage, is the Platypus attack, and this one is very similar. So, but what the article says is that Platypus and Heartbleed, which requires specific knowledge of the cryptographic algorithms running on the victim machine, Collide plus Power is a new attack claimed to be a generic attack that works on any modern CPU, which allows co-location of attacker and victim data in the same memory cache space. Well, that's interesting. So you can trick the CPU into putting them in the same memory cache space. Yes.
So what does that mean?
It means it's very slow, is one of the other things that you'll garner from the article. So I linked to an article, and then there's a research paper that you can go read as well. Which again, reading through these research papers is it's not a light read. So they estimate in order to use this attack to capture a 40-bit key, it would take about a month.
Wow.
Most of our key spaces today are larger than 40 bits, right? So now, while unlikely, I could still see this being used potentially in the wild if, think about how often people rotate their keys, and that varies depending on what the key is and what it's used for and what their
how it's being used.
Specific procedures are, right? I could see an attacker sitting there for a long time going, well, if I sit here for 6 months or a year, I might, if my math is correct, maybe a year to get a more modern key.
I was going to bring up the math, Paul. I mean, let's say it's an 80-bit key. That doesn't mean it's 2 months.
Well, you're right, Jeff.
This is an exponential.
It's thing. Not an exponential.
I don't know what, but it is exponential. It's not whatever that.
Yeah.
Sequential.
Yeah, I know.
Linear.
Linear. Thank you. An 80-bit key might be 3 years. It's something significantly larger.
Or if the attack advances, it could be 45 days. As the attack gets proven out in the wild, and it could depend on the CPU. It could depend on other conditions. Intel has said that they have, to use your word, Jeff, countermeasures in place. Not that it's your word, but reminded me the appropriate terms, countermeasures in place for attacks like Hertz, Bleed, Platypus, and those countermeasures cover this particular attack. And in the Register article that I linked to, my story number 5, they link to the Intel documentation that is very, very in-depth, and I won't pretend to understand or do it justice. However, it is on my list to talk to people who work at Intel or have worked at Intel to explain that better. But there are countermeasures to the basically class of attacks that are working on the premise of measuring power fluctuations within the CPU. But there are countermeasures to that. So that was my story number 5. Whew. Larry, you and I had a couple, at least one story in common. It was the Canon one, which Canon we covered.
Yep.
What were the other ones? Oh, I wanted to. Well, Jeff, what do you want to talk about next? How bad Microsoft is?
Yes.
Well, yeah, and I neglected to capture in my memory the civil servant that called out Microsoft, but I had that article posted.
Yes. It was U.S. Senator Ron Wyden.
Senator.
Yes, Ron Wyden, I'm going to say, Democrat from Oregon, requested that the Justice Department, Federal Trade Commission, and Cybersecurity and Cyber Safety Review Board investigate whether lax security practices by Microsoft enabled the recent Chinese government hack of multiple U.S. government agencies and high-ranking federal officials. And I believe they're talking about the key, air quotes, key leak that we covered probably a couple of weeks ago. Also, Amit from Tenable, the Tenable CEO, Amit, published an article on LinkedIn, which is my story number 23, and basically took the gloves off when confronting Microsoft. Now, Tenable and Amit are in a unique position to make these accusations because they discovered vulnerability, I think more than one vulnerability, or at least a vulnerability in Azure that they reported to Microsoft, and Microsoft has not fixed, and did not, in Tenable's mind, did not do the proper due diligence for response to that disclosure, and just blatantly didn't fix the problem. And there's another great article. You got to read Amit's LinkedIn article, but then he did an interview with CyberScoop. That article is kind of like an editorial on this entire situation. I really kind of feel you got to read both, right? You got to kind of get inside Amit's head with what's going on. I don't think he's wrong, by the way. I don't know. They haven't released the technical details of the vulnerability, so it's hard to assess the criticality and the impact of the vulnerability they discovered because they haven't disclosed the details of it. But you also got to read the kind of editorial to think about how this situation is playing out right now, which is, I mean, the Cyberscoop did a great job. His harsh public critique of Microsoft, a relatively rare event for a high-profile corporate figure in cybersecurity, follows criticism from lawmakers and researchers alike after a recent cyber attack affecting U.S. government officials resulted from a Microsoft security lapse.
Yep.
So it ties multiple, just that couple sentences, very well written, ties these events together. The large-scale cyber attack, U.S. Senator, and now Amit going what is going on here? Amit says, in Microsoft's case, you have a culture which denies the criticality of vulnerabilities. There isn't a straighter shot across the bow at Microsoft, which I have to say hasn't been taken in some time. There are points in time where you can take that shot, and it's justified all day long. And I think Microsoft's done a good job over time. However, it appears that recent events maybe have changed that. Maybe the tides have turned a little bit.
I'm going to say that Microsoft was a joke security-wise for many, many years. Okay, I said for years, I in the last few years, I've been I hate to say it, but Microsoft's doing a really great job because they spent billions with a B of dollars on building up a security apparatus, on Defender, on really working on it. They had developer outreach. They had, they hired some very serious security people. They really worked on their tools, and they kicked ass for a long time.
Yeah, and now I wonder if it's starting to go the other way, and it's not because they had. That's another product of theirs, Josh. No, I wonder if it's starting to go the other way, and a lot of that being, that they're not being transparent and that type of stuff. So I took a look at a read of the press release from Ron Wyden, the one that Jeff had linked there, and I thought this was pretty interesting in that a lot of it may have been passive aggressive shots across the bow. I'll read a little bit here. Microsoft blamed its customers for using the default logging settings chosen by Microsoft, despite them saying you should be doing better. And in between the lines there. And then they blamed them for not storing the high value encryption keys in a hardware vault. Blame the customers. But reading a little bit further on, the significant cybersecurity failures by Microsoft was that the blog post suggests that Microsoft did not store high-value encryption keys in a hardware security module, as the company advises its customers to do. And it was using an encryption key that was valid for 5 years and was still accepted by Microsoft software, even though it had expired in 2021, 2 years before the hack. And neither the internal or external security audits detected the weaknesses. I wouldn't argue that maybe they did detect it, but maybe it was so low on the priority list that, hell, this certificate is expired. You should probably fix that. It's probably a low.
There's probably two reasons why a company like Microsoft isn't responding to this. One is they think it's low priority, as Larry says, or they really don't have a good solution yet, and that's why they haven't done anything about it.
I think it's the latter.
That's what
to Paul's argument. Just change the keys. Like, you got a key, put another 5-year key on it, and then we go back to the Wi-Fi thing. But
I think that's problematic on a similar scale.
I think that's valid, but I also think that we need some details from Amit's article to shed a little more light on this. So he says in March of 2023 is when Tenable's research team discovered these vulnerabilities. So they discovered the vulnerability would enable an unauthenticated attacker to access cross-tenant applications and sensitive data, such as authentication secrets. To give you an idea of how bad this is, Amit says, our team very quickly discovered authentication secrets to a bank.
Unauthenticated. That's fucking horrible.
Right. So that sounds really bad. Like, that sounds like something that, even if it's very inconvenient and costly, should be fixed. But I think this is the game that we're playing oftentimes with vendors, especially Microsoft, and I'll call them out as well, that if it's very inconvenient and costly to fix, they will not fix it in an expedient manner, right?
Yeah.
So Microsoft took 90 days to implement a partial fix. And then the full fix. Your
insinuation that Microsoft doesn't care about security is so. Yeah, never mind. Anyway,
I don't think it's that they don't care. Though. They don't. It's not that they don't care. They care more about the bottom line.
Yes.
Well, yeah, it's
and they do the fix.
They have billions upon billions of dollars that they could have sent so many resources to go fix this problem, but if they do, it comes away from taking away money from their shareholders. Bottom line.
What do you venture to guess Microsoft's profit was in 2022?
I don't know. Probably greater than it was in 2021, and I bet 2023 will be greater than 2022. Just saying.
Anyone wanna guess? Venture a guess what Microsoft's annual gross profit for 2023 was?
$3.7 billion.
$146 billion.
That's close. It's close.
Yeah. Oh, that was 2023. Sorry, Microsoft's annual gross profit for 2022 was $135 billion.
See, it was bigger than the year before.
Yeah.
What about 2021?
Is it? Sorry, it was 135 billion was a 17.06 increase from 2021. So 2021 was 115 billion.
See? Okay.
Yet, when in the face of something that, from what we know right now, has an impact on their customers, will not fix it. But now
they could have literally spent.
There's a lot of details.
$1 billion to fix this problem.
Yeah, but does it justify that?
No, it doesn't. But they could have.
They could have,
and they still would have had a record.
No, I don't know what the increase in profit year over year. Right? Yeah,
that's oversimplifying it, though.
Agreed.
But also now I'm gonna have to defend Microsoft a little bit, because going back to our Wi-Fi example, it's not necessarily the cost, but the inconvenience.
Yep.
It's very analogous to, I'm changing the password to my Wi-Fi network, therefore I have to go reconfigure every single device that talks to my Wi-Fi network. That is both costly and inconvenient. And it may be to solve this problem in the cloud, the tenants of the cloud would have to do something, or they would have to implement the fix that somehow impacts their customers. And I mean, you can just see people sitting around in a meeting room, Microsoft going, well, if we make this fix and we inconvenience our customers, how many of those customers are going to leave and they're going to go to GCP or they're going to go to AWS because they're just frustrated, right? Because we don't want to keep picking off our customers.
I mean, also in Microsoft's defense, given that we don't have a lot of detail.
Holy crap.
We don't know that there's exploits in the wild. We don't know how difficult it is to actually implement the exploit.
Correct. Correct.
We don't know what, planets need to be aligned and what conditions need to exist. I mean, I remember arguing with Renault back when, what year was it? 14 or 15, when NIST came out and said, okay, SSL version 2, version 3, whatever it is bad. It's got to be deprecated and retired. And so, and it came out in PCI because PCI says use robust current, cryptographic things. And I remember that we had a problem internally. It's probably been long enough that, our whatever we called the cloud instance at the time, it was before the IO days, but we were using within our products at Tenable SSL version 3 or whatever, and so we were going to need to upgrade all of our products, and that was a huge inconvenience. So Renault was pushing back on, is it really that big a deal? And he had a point to a point in the fact that, the weaknesses in SSL v3, you had to do a lot of work to exploit that to get a very little bit of data ultimately, because it was session based. So they might have been making a very complicated calculation on whether and when to do something about this particular problem, because we know what the problem is, but we don't know what the problem is.
Yep. I want to jump back to that inconvenience thing just real quick here. And while you guys were talking, I did a Google search for how many of the Fortune 100 use O365. I don't know specifically what product here was in question, but if the first article that showed up was that 90% of the Fortune 500 companies use Microsoft Cloud services. Another one had that 70% of Fortune 500 firms have a license for 365. This is if you have to take something like O365 offline because this is one of your affected products, or O365 that runs in Azure or on any of their cloud services, you're potentially taking 90% of the Fortune 1000 globally offline. That's an inconvenience.
Because
I get that.
Because of the monopolistic nature of Microsoft and Google to a certain extent, you want encrypted email? Just join O365. You just hit encrypt, and if they're in O365, it's automatically encrypted across. Jeff, don't yell at me. I'm just telling you what they say. It's Everybody's going to be O365 now. It hooks up to your Azure Active Directory. You get Intune. You get, you get E5, and you get everything under the sun. You get DLP. You get it's an all-inclusive package. So
is it even
you can
O365 now? Isn't it now M365? Or am I getting that?
That's
backwards?
if you rent Windows as well.
Gotcha.
I like
So you can rent
I like
Windows
to own my Windows, like the one behind Jeff.
Remember,
I think
you will own nothing and you'll be happy.
Hold on, Aaron.
I think the only way that this can actually be fixed is you keep going on about the bottom line, is to actually hit them in the bottom line. So as GDPR does, and as the SEC on one of the other stories might do, hit them with 4% of their sort of gross international sort of income. It's like, if I'm British Airways and I'm losing PII and I'm getting hit with big fines, if that actual sort of vulnerability has come from Microsoft and they were told about it 4 months ago and they haven't done anything about it, well, there's a culpability there, right?
Yeah.
No, it took me a while to get to where you were going, Aaron, and now I completely 100% agree, right? It's not that you want to force Microsoft to fix the vulnerability based on the vulnerability. You want to make Microsoft fix the vulnerability based on pressure from their customers and risk to their customers, right? And maybe
financial risk,
fiduciary harm caused, that is trickle down effect from their customers. Yeah.
Which again is something that they might have already been taking into account.
Oh, I'm sure they have a model for that.
And they've, and it hasn't hit whatever threshold where they need to do anything yet, or we don't know what they're doing. It hasn't dropped yet.
What was that profit amount last year? 140 billion? What threshold?
40-ish billion, yeah.
That'd have to be a pretty high threshold, I'm just saying.
But don't forget that number's got to go up every year, Josh. You know what I mean?
Always goes up.
But it has to go up. So like
it's got to go up. It's got to go up by
a certain amount.
Certain amount, and generally more than the previous year.
And the amount that you said it was going to go up, isn't it like a forecast, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, except that there's these things called, the line doesn't always go up. And that's going to be an interesting moment.
Yeah, and that's bad. Because people don't want to invest to just make the same amount of, to break even. People want to invest to make money. Right?
Unless you're a VC in cyber, but that's a different.
That's a portfolio. Yeah, then you got a portfolio, and that some are going to lose, some are going to win. You just hope you win more than you lose. In that model, I mean, coming back down to it though, I guess there's we played both sides of it though, right? I think we do.
We have.
No good answers.
And there's a lot of nuance, a lot of details on both sides of it, and it's interesting when we can look at smart people on both sides that are disagreeing without all the details. And I don't think we're going to come to a conclusion until we maybe get more details.
But we've all been around long enough to know a little bit about what the dance is.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a senator and a CEO of a pretty major cybersecurity company that have gone on record, and that'll get them a little bit of mileage for whatever reason they did that. But how often do things happen because let's go on the government side? How often does things really happen because some politician makes a bold declaration?
Right.
Not often.
Yeah. No, I agree. But what I don't want is one of the extremes to be software companies can get away with not fixing shit that is impactful to their customers and society, right? And I think that's why senators and people like Amit standing up going, no, we need to call them, we need to put them in check. Like this shouldn't be the case. Now, there's more to it than that. There's two sides to every story. And I think we've done a great job of belaboring the point now at this point, but so let's move on.
I got one and I think it was one of your stories, Paul, that kind of ties into a little bit of some of the challenges that we were talking with the Microsoft there. And that was your story. Ooh, where did it go?
15 kind of relates. 14 kind of relates.
It was 18.
18
Device and firmware encryption options.
is the
for IoT.
proactivity side of what we're talking about.
Yeah, because and I say that it kind of relates a little bit in some of the things that Microsoft was being accused of was not storing their keys and so forth in a hardware security module and so forth. And this comes to some of those types of things about doing proactive options for your firmware security and IoT.
IoT security device and firmware encryption options. It was a great article, very, very technical, very detailed in some of the options that you have for creating a secure platform, right? And again, this is the proactive side of things. If you architect your product correctly from the beginning and understand the things that are in this article, you will be more resilient to future vulnerabilities that are discovered. Even ones like slightly outside of, maybe there's some hardware vulnerability, but that hardware vulnerability isn't as impacted because you read this article and you put inside your product ways to protect that system. In fact, I had one on the Amazon Echo stuff, and the attack was only like a tethered kind of attack.
Yep. So you got to be plugged.
I don't know if it was USB or like a UART, or you had to be physically connected to the board. I would assume that's what he meant by tethered. You had to be physically connected to the board in order to bypass the security controls. That you couldn't just do it through software, right? And that was because of, bless you, architecture changes or architecture decisions that the team had made that limit the scope of some of these vulnerabilities.
Yep. Now, I thought the overall the article I think was quite well written in laying out some of the issues, some of the gotchas, like if you're going to use a TPM or a secure enclave, you're going to have an increased cost because of that hardware. You're going to have additional development time and so forth. And I get some of that. However, there were two things in there that I found were not so much anymore a problem. And that was the discussion around secure boot plus signed firmware and secure boot plus signed and encrypted firmware. One of the detractors that was listened here is that an often overlooked cost to be considered is that firmware verification adds a certain amount of overhead to each boot. In many cases, this is negligible, but it may, for example, still not be affordable on small battery-powered devices where every millisecond of runtime counts.
You agree with that?
No,
I don't.
Well, how many battery-powered IoT devices now are dependent on millisecond additional runtimes?
Very few. Specialized.
None.
I'm sure there's a pocket of very specialized devices that might. But
for clarity, is it runtime or is it response time? Just to be clear. I mean,
runtime.
So just how long they last on battery.
Yes, because you are increasing the boot time, you are losing milliseconds of time.
But the battery impacts are negligible at that point.
Milliseconds and the words here are where every millisecond of runtime counts.
If the device is that mission critical or milliseconds of runtime counts, they would have put a bigger friggin' battery on it.
Right. And arguably battery technology today is pretty darn good. I mean, we went on vacation not that long ago and I bought a newish GoPro because I wanted a waterproof GoPro. Considering the original the GoPro that I had was the GoPro version 1. So I bought a GoPro 9 and those batteries are small. And for capturing
4K,
4 to 8K video for 30 minutes with that battery, there's no excuse. If it had taken me an extra 3 seconds of boot time for it to validate that firmware, who gives a shit?
Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah. So,
agree.
So that's the only beef that I had with this article. absolutely everything else is there. We start talking about device unique keys and a common key between devices. And development versus production signing keys. Yeah, those are some decisions that you need to make. Those have a little bit more impact on your pipeline, your development stuff, and how they end up to the consumer. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, also you can make things so secure that it's just too inconvenient to maintain, which is...
I feel like you have a story on that.
Yeah, that was my story number 16. This person did, I thought, a great job of describing what a secure Arch Linux install is. However, keep in mind what they're suggesting is a lot of maintenance.
For the record, the link that you have for that returns 404.
Oh, that's too bad.
Dope.
I didn't do the maintenance.
They renamed the file to 00 basic system install as opposed to basic system install.
I got you. I was linking to a GitHub and they changed things.
Yep.
Damn it. Well, we'll have to dig up and fix that link. However, there's in the method that I read, they suggest things like issue all of your own secure boot keys, which you can totally do, right? I mean, one of the interesting things, astonishing things that about secure boot is that you can create all of your own keys. Then you can use those keys to sign all of the software that is then validated by secure boot. However, keep in mind when you do that you are now responsible for signing all the new software that participates in secure boot, which also means you're responsible for validating that software is actually good software that you're signing.
So you mean, it looks good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I got a new kernel module. I need to sign that, put that in there so it's secure boot
I totally
works.
reviewed all that source code. Check.
Totally reviewed all that source code, and there's totally no vulnerabilities in it, right? Yeah. That is one of the benefits, I think, of relying on
open source software.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm a little jaded on that. I'm currently listening to the book Fancy Bear Goes Fishing.
Mm-hmm.
And I keep debating on whether or not I should turn it off.
Turn what off?
The book, and just move to something different.
Why?
What is Fancy Bear Goes Fishing?
It's a book about, quote, 5 amazing computer hacks and so forth. And I think 4 out of the 5 amazing computer hacks.
We covered this book. Yeah. We talked about it. You're listening to it.
I've heard about ad nauseum. Admittedly, there are a couple of times I came away with a little tidbit that I didn't know. Scott J. Shapiro is the author.
Yeah.
I'm listening to the first story.
We talked about the 5. This is the book about the 5 hacks. Yeah.
And so the first one I'm still listening to, which is going on and on and on and on about the Morris worm.
Okay, I mean it's a very well studied, documented.
Exactly, and it's very well studied and documented. And I've read about it.
Can you still find the source code? Is the source code out there on the internet somewhere?
Probably. I mean, but I've read about it 1,000 times, and I'm like, I don't need to read about this again. And one of the things that came up was about open source code, and that that everybody can review it, and everybody should be reviewing it, but nobody does.
Well, yeah, we've talked about that on multiple occasions. Yes.
Yeah. So, sorry, I got distracted by.
You did get distracted, and then I got distracted, and then you were talking about that book and the 5 hacks. And how do you say something new about the Morris worm, though?
You introduce this concept of upcode and downcode. Fuck. Huh?
What?
Yeah, I don't. It seems like he is not writing this book for a computer professional who he's probably writing it towards someone, I'm guessing more geared to someone that is just coming up into the ranks, into the high school, and that may not understand all the technical nuances of what a worm or a virus about, or where you target your attacks.
I don't know. There's a lot better examples of books that do that. Yeah. Like, have you read Crypto by Steve Levy? Awesome.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
But he, to the best of my knowledge, he spends a good 20 minutes in the book, 20 minutes in time frame, describing his language for where things live on his version of the stack for exploitation and where these attacks occur, and whether it's down code, meaning like assembly language, or up code, which is people and ethics. And I'm like, no. In any case, I'll chime in later when I've actually read the whole book as to whether or not it was worth it. Or not. Moving along.
I'm going to guess not, but that's my own personal opinion.
You know what I really hate, though?
You know what really grinds my gears?
This is
Lindsay Lohan.
And, we're quoting a show when we say Lindsay Lohan, but Family Guy. But exploring security commits in Python, my story number 15. I hate it when security bugs get silently fixed. I mean, I guess it's worse if they never get fixed. Like if Microsoft refuses to fix a security vulnerability. I hate that probably more. I don't know. It's pretty, in terms of grinding my gears, they grind my gears pretty equally. Because the other scenario is the security fix gets fixed, but it's not listed as a security fix. It just gets fixed organically. It gets fixed in a release or an update. Mm-hmm. Maybe it gets a mention in the release notes. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's just fixed. Maybe there's a git commit comment somewhere that, like, hey, I fixed this weird. This is a weird bug. I fixed it. But really, that was a security vulnerability. So how am I, as a user of that software, supposed to make decisions, risk-based decisions, if I don't know if something has a security impact or not, let alone the severity of that security impact? I don't even know that it's a security impact or not.
Yep.
So
I was taking issue with the, quote, silent security commits in this article. And I'm like, how do you get a silent commit to GitHub? And now that you're saying this, I'm like, oh, okay. It wasn't intentionally silent.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So this is based on a paper, actually. And the paper is called Exploring Security Commits in Python, and addresses this issue in Python and through a series of, I'll call them algorithms. I think they had kind of 3 kind of passes on the data. They created a project called PysecDB, which you can request the data. It's not public, but you can request it. It consists of 1,258 security commits and 2,791 non-security commits. They're basically trying to, through this research, figure out if the commit was security related or not, even if the developers didn't tag it as a security fix, and make that data available.
It's interesting. How do they go about determining whether that fix that was submitted that wasn't tagged as a security fix was actually a security fix?
It's like math, basically.
AI.
They talked about different. I read some of the paper. They talked about like different passes on the data. So the base data set contains the security commits associated with CVE records provided by MITRE. To increase the variety of security commits, we build the pilot data set from GitHub by filtering keywords within the commit messages. Not all commits provide commit messages. We further construct the augmented data set by understanding the semantics of the code changes.
Okay. Fair enough.
To build the augmented data set, we propose a new graph representation named commit CPG and a multi-attributed graph learning model named Scoopy to identify the security commit candidates through both sequential and structural code semantics. So basically, they're looking at the changes in the code.
Yep. So they're applying machine learning
to the code commits to go, does that have a security impact or not? So you basically,
fair enough.
I would imagine the paper probably talks about how you train the model to recognize. This is like, let's break it down to basic machine learning. You're training Google Photos to recognize a dog, right?
Yep.
So they're feeding the machine learning algorithm. This is a regular commit. This is a security commit.
Out of curiosity, is there a legal obligation for software vendors or product vendors to report security problems, or is that just sort of, it's the tradition, it's the way it's done?
I don't think there is, Jeff, and it's interesting when Aaron was talking earlier, that's kind of where my brain was going too. Like, we can create legislation based on a breach, because a breach is a more tangible thing than a security vulnerability, which can be very, very nuanced, right? And certainly, like, even just the presence, like whether a bug is a security vulnerability or not is very nuanced, but the impact or the severity of a vulnerability is also, as we've discovered on this show, talking about it numerous times, is very, very nuanced kind of thing. So to then have legislation, well, like, what would legislation say? Hey, if you've got a vulnerability in your product and it's got a CVSS score of 8.0 or greater, you have to disclose that to your customers within 5 days.
But that's a little bit of a circular logic, though, I think, because part of the severity of CVSS scores, part of the equation has to do with the exploitation and whether exploits exist in the wild type of thing. Whether it's been seen to have being exploited or not. So if you're holding your cards closed and you're not disclosing any information about it, you're less likely to find the exploitation, which is going to keep the CVSS.
But whose score is it? Whose score is it? Is it MITRE's score? Is it the vendor score? Is it anyone can take the, you know what I mean, the inputs for CVSS and create a score, right? Like, ultimately a human has to think about some of those artifacts to go into the score, the data points to go into the score, right? But to make that conclusion, whoever or whatever body is doing it, you have to have all the information, which to me is where it's getting a little bit circular. Well, it's like that meme that Larry posted, if you're not capturing,
I think you're thinking about this wrong.
Perhaps.
Can I point out the names on the paper?
Sure.
Okay.
Which paper?
So the names on the paper about the security commits?
Yeah. They're Chinese researchers. Yes.
Yes. At George Mason University and apparently Dougherty Valley High School. I have no idea where Dougherty Valley is, but think of this as not a way to find the commits. Think of this as a way to find things to exploit.
Correct.
Right.
Absolutely.
Which is an argument for not disclosing the information, right?
No, because security through obscurity is such a good idea, right? Right, Jeff?
Well, it's not, but trust me, it's used practically in the commercial world all the time.
It's used badly in the commercial world all the time as well.
True.
I don't see a way to quantify the severity of a security vulnerability to then enforce legislation. And I'm not saying necessarily that's a bad thing, because I think we all have the best intentions, and the intentions being, if there is a really bad vulnerability, we want to see.
Are you including Microsoft in that thought? I mean, do they have the best intentions?
Not always. I'm talking about our intentions, Jeff, not the software vendors' intentions, right? Our intentions as security professionals are, we would like to see something that would enforce and reinforce with software vendors to have them fix vulnerabilities that we determine that there's some maybe formula we can say are really bad. The problem with that is, like, in history, the way I've seen this kind of play out with internal policies to organizations is they come up with a policy that says we have to fix every vulnerability within 3 days that is of a CVSS score of 8.0 or greater, right? And so what they'll do is they'll ask the people generating the scores if that could be a 7.9, because we don't want to have to fix that vulnerability, right? So then it just comes down to kind of fudging the data that goes into the metric to score it, to have it suit your needs, right? Because then if we were to have something that said, drew a line in the sand at a score, then we'd have to look at, well, who's assigning the score and who's influencing the score? How corrupt can the generation of that score be, and who's going to benefit from that?
Well, it's interesting because in the PCI world, ever since I think version 2 was released in 2010, the standard, the idea of classifying the severity of vulnerabilities has been put upon the organization itself.
Correct.
And it's not been well embraced, frankly, because most organizations will just go with whatever the pen test said or whatever the scan report says in terms of the criticality or the severity or the score. Interesting, in version 4 of PCI, the way things have been forever, whether it's a pen test or a vulnerability scan, if there's a certain level, you have to remediate it, and everything else, you should get to it, whenever you can. In version 4, that's changing, and organizations are now going to have to be able to come up with a plan based on a risk analysis of when do we fix all the medium level vulnerabilities or range of scores, however they quantify it, the lows, the informationals. They have to have a plan for fixing them. It's still open ended in PCI is not demanding that all the severity, all the criticals get fixed in 30 days, and highs and mediums get fixed in 90 days and lows in 180 days. They're not prescriptive like that, but they're saying you got to come up with a plan, and you have to have a number associated with how long you're going to wait to fix all those things, but they have to get fixed.
Yeah, but again, it comes down to if you're self-assigning the score, you can self-assign your way out of the responsibility for having to fix something. But
you can.
Now,
but
devil's advocate to my own.
But it has to be based on risk analysis, and that has to be real, and that's something that me as an assessor is going to have to come in and evaluate and say, yeah, your criteria is crap. You need to come up with something better than that. So there's opportunity there. I mean, what PCI is basically saying is, you can no longer just essentially ignore the mediums and lows and not ever get around to fixing them. You got to have a plan to fix
I have a PCI question. Does requirement 5 in version 4.0 of the standard imply that you have to protect and or patch your firmware?
Did you mention on air, or was that before we?
It was last week. I mentioned on air.
Then you've been reading PCI,
and I have been reading. Yes, I don't have a lot of things to do. Apparently,
I'll give you some things to do.
I know, right? Apparently, my priorities are misguided, and I'm spending my time reading PCI. So PCI requirement 5 in version 4 of the standard says, requirement 5. For those that don't know, I know Jeff knows, it means it's defined as protect all systems and networks from malicious software, right?
Right.
The first sentence in the overview says, malicious software, in parentheses malware, is software or firmware designed to infiltrate or damage a computer system without the owner's knowledge or consent with the intent of compromising confidentiality, integrity, availability, blah, 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 blah. So I guess it's not a call to action. That's a definition of what you have to protect from. Malicious. It's defining malicious software as software or firmware, which is interesting.
That is interesting, and
firmware is just software that's hard to fix.
Correct.
Yeah, essentially. But so your question is PCI 4.0 saying you have to patch firmware?
From what I gather, it is not. I wish it would, but it is not.
Well, it goes to the subjective nature of PCI and the fact that it's an assessment and not an audit. It's going to be if somebody if somebody works at the organization and can put 2 and 2 together and thinks it's the right thing to do, or there's an assessor that is aware of the ramifications of not patching the firmware, then you could be held to it. The organization that's going through.
But it doesn't sound like they're doing that, because in 12.3.4, hardware and software technologies in use are reviewed at least once every 12 months. In the guidance section under good practice, it says organizations should review firmware versions to ensure they remain current and supported by the vendors. And it used that language that sometimes I like, sometimes I don't, but that's should.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and should is the bane, has been the bane of PCI since day one, because should is interpreted as, oh, I don't have to do that.
I don't have to do that. Right.
Yep.
But PCI is saying that you should review firmware versions and ensure they remain current. You know what that means? Review the firmware versions is one thing. That's just looking at it. That's going, my system that is processing payment card data has this firmware version on it, right?
Right.
Ensure they remain current and supported by the vendor. Well, that's kind of interesting. Ensure that they remain current means you have to patch it to the latest version where available.
Right.
And supported by the vendor is a totally different thing. Because once it's not, what do you do once it's not supported by the vendor? Like, do they have other guidance that says you need to replace the hardware so that you can get firmware that's then supported by the vendor?
Maybe.
I
mean, that's been an issue, for a long time from requirement 6, which is where you had the requirement to, patch, any patch any vulnerability that's discovered that a patch becomes available, it's a critical security patch. You have to install it within 30 days of release of the patch. And, long ago, people figured out, well, if it's an unsupported system or operating system, there are no patches. So what, do we need to do anything about it? Because there isn't anything. And the prevailing wisdom is, well, no, you still have to do something about it. And generally it means update to a supported version. But there's, depending on the client, the size of the client, and the clout that they have within the PCI ecosystem, that largely determines whether they're held to that or not. But the goal, the use of the word should is, this is the right thing to do, and PCI has a pretty consistent track record. The council that writes the standard, they have a pretty consistent track record in not wanting to put a stake in the ground. They really want the organization to do the right thing, but they acknowledge that they don't want to tell you what the right thing is, partially because they don't want the accountability in terms of any kind of negative liability things. Well, you said this was okay, but 3 months later something happened and it blew it all up. They don't want to get into that game. But it comes out. So I can see where they're coming from.
Well, let's paint this scenario quickly, Jeff. That let's say I'm a merchant and I have to fall under some level of PCI compliance, and I come to you, Jeff, and I said, look, I've got systems that process payment card data, and they are not up to date on firmware, and the firmware that is vulnerable to documented vulnerabilities. Does PCI say I have to fix that? Should I fix that? Like, what's your guidance in your PCI wisdom on that?
I mean, the guidance from a PCI perspective is, and I can speak, from a personal perspective, and I think most QSAs that I know would do the same thing. If you know it's a problem, and it's a security problem, you can talk to the client and try to explain to them why, from a security perspective, this is the right thing to do, whether you can point to a PCI requirement and say, here's where it says you need to do this. Right. And I've had clients that want to do the right thing and will do it. I've had clients that are like, well, it doesn't say that I have to do it.
It says you should do it. It doesn't say you have to do it. So therefore I'm not going to do it. Yeah.
So I'll take it under advisement. I mean, that's kind of the best that we can do. As the QSAs, as the third party coming in, is like, I can tell you what to do. I can tell you what's the right thing to do, and you can choose to do it or not, and you might get away with it in the near term. It's certainly not going to be a compliance issue, but if something happens where you are breached and this becomes the issue.
Yeah.
This was the point of exploitation, or what was used to get to it. You're probably still going to get fined, and even though it was a should kind of thing, maybe you're not going to get a PCI fine, but you're going to pay the price in some way. So kind of like you're saying earlier, it's hard to come up with legislation that's going to force things. It's hard for PCI to come up with prescriptive things that you have to do. The whole PCI ecosystem relies on the QSA being the security expert, giving the expert advice, giving the interpretation, and sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't.
I can see it being very difficult, though, Jeff, if the easier scenario is I have this hardware, it's in 10,000 stores, the firmware version's vulnerable, there's a fix from the vendor, and I don't want to apply it. Like, I'm just not applying it, right? Like, to me, the process should work towards, yes, we're going to apply that. Now, completely different scenario, if I got 10,000 point of sale devices out there, their firmware is vulnerable, but the firmware is no longer supported by the vendor. You should have a little extra time to address that. I'm not saying you shouldn't address it, but I think there needs to be a separate notation process, something to go, yeah, we basically have to swap out all 10,000 devices in order to, have this particular vulnerability remediated, right?
Right.
So it should be a different thing.
Now, I mean, typically it's not going to be a compliance issue unless and until it's showing up in a pen test report as a flagged as a finding.
Yep.
Or it shows up in a vulnerability scan, or if it's web based, if it's an application based thing, if you're failing some sort of security test, then you can hold the organization to you have to fix it because it was a finding. It was
a finding, right?
Yeah.
It has to be a finding. Which is the other tricky thing about firmware, is finding folks that are willing to prove it as a finding, right? Because then you got to get someone to get in there that's comfortable enough to muck with the firmware to go, oh, look, like, hey, this is a finding because I exploited it. When exploiting it could potentially brick the system. That's the issue I have with the firmware things, is the attackers are like, yeah, whatever. I'm going to do whatever. I'm an attacker. Like, if I break the system, I break the system. Like, whatever. I move on to the next thing. The pen tester, as Larry and others can attest to, you don't want to break the customer stuff. And you don't want to go, oh, I was trying to prove this firmware implant works.
That depends on the customer.
By the way, I bricked your system. I mean, if you're all above board and talked about that's the type of testing you want to do, I think that should be in scope. I think that should happen. But it's a tricky thing.
It's a tricky thing too, but how many of these firmware vulnerabilities that we're talking about are remotely exploitable?
Well, you have to gain a foothold.
Ballpark.
It depends on which firmware we're talking about on the system. BMCs are remotely exploitable. So there is a BMC in there of several different types. There is documented research recently from Eclipsium on that. Much of the other firmware you're accessing from the operating system, so you have a foothold in the operating system. The leverage that gives you, if I were an attacker and I wanted to collect credit cards, I would totally want to be in the firmware, because I can persist reboots, I can persist OS reinstalls, I can persist on the system and continually collect credit card information.
Well, interesting. Gosh. We could talk about this.
We can take the rest offline, but I wanted to have the conversation and understand it. But
can I bother for two things?
Yeah, Josh, you're coming in a little low.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
He's so low.
Like your decibel level is low.
I can't even hear.
I haven't changed anything. Let me put my gain up a little bit. Is that better?
Nope, that's just.
I'm hearing him fine. So it might be just on your.
I can't hear him. I cannot hear him at all.
Oh damn!
Oh, there we go. Talk again, Josh.
All right. Hey. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Is it better?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So two quick things. One is just a personal note. Sorry, but I have to. Happy birthday, Dad. My father hit his.
Happy birthday, Dad.
Happy birthday, Dad.
Happy birthday, Dad.
I'm not even going to say how old he is. Okay, other people say they can hear me fine.
Older than you by at least 16 years.
More than 20, but not much more than that. And secondly, I just threw a breaking news story in the Slack channel. I don't know if you saw that.
All right, let's cover it next. What is it?
All right.
Breaking news.
So HackerOne just laid off 12% of their entire workforce.
Ouch. Ooh, interesting.
Wow.
So in terms of the bug bounty programs and the bug bounty business model, that's kind of interesting. They said that I just read the CEO announcement. They basically said they're laying off 12% of everybody across the world. The hackeronis, as he put them.
But there's a lot of, hold on, there's a lot of factors. I don't want to say that speaks to any particular vertical and the success of that vertical. I think that companies that are having layoffs, the vertical and the overall global financial market, maybe the actual vertical in that for that particular financial market, maybe under a little stress. I want to say that most of the time layoffs are a result of how that company was managed. Not so a systemic issue in the company, not an external third party or external factors that led to that. It's often a combination of both. Right, Josh? I don't think you land in a place of layoffs it could, but if the company's mismanaged, they might have layoffs, right?
Well,
if the market that they're in is under tough times, they might have.
Call it right sizing, right?
Yeah.
Paul?
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
downsizing, it's rights.
Well, a lot of companies in the last 6 months basically said they're switching from hypergrowth mode, which emphasizes the sales and marketing teams.
Yes.
They're switching to sustainability mode,
Correct.
which emphasizes having the right sizing, Jeff, you're right. The correct amount of people in sales and marketing to keep a sustainable effort going,
and that could
not
be
a hypergrowth mode.
Some of that's a market correction, and some of that's a company internal, correction kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, absolutely.
And I'll also argue that it also speaks to what the overall market is doing. Like, let's say, and I'm going to throw an example out there that's completely contrived and made up. Let's say you have a product that specializes in making a product called AB, and it's comprised of parts A and B. But turns out the market really wants product A. They want the A component, but they don't want the B component. They're easily split. So you lay off. You
the people associated with B.
You transfer all the people that can be cross-trained from B to A, and then you lay off the remaining staff that did B, and then you immediately hire a bunch of staff that can do A or that have experience doing A. So
it's a great insight.
Great insight. So I'd also say that's also to right sizing.
Larry needs to go on.
Changing.
You need to go on like ESW and BSW too.
I don't know. This is probably the smartest. This is the smartest thing I've said about that in my entire life. So
awesome.
it's probably the only thing. So
related to it, and I'm trying to find it, and of course I can't. But somebody posted on LinkedIn today, and several people reposted it, that there's a rumor that our industry, right after Black Hat, is there's going to be a lot of layoffs for whatever reasons. And the point of the post was, I think at Black Hat they're convening an informal sort of hiring discussion. How do you get ready for the next job? How do you?
Okay, so I thought so. I was seeing this the opposite side, like getting a bunch of people together to help work on their resumes and all of those types of things, as opposed to a bunch of companies getting together to talk about layoffs, which I would argue would be collusion.
I would say the same thing. Yeah, exactly. But I think the interesting thing is, I think that what's going to happen, my suspicion is that somebody made a guess. Hey, Black Hat is where a lot of venture capital and private equity firms meet companies and where they start making deals and make those connections. So if those connections aren't made this year, maybe somebody was just sort of thinking this through.
I completely agree, Josh, where you're going with this. And I'll try and simplify it. If you're a Series A or B funded company, let's just say, and you're out of runway, or you're close to being out of runway, Black Hat's where you're going to have your meetings to talk about your next round of funding. If that falls through, you got no more runway. So you either got to start laying off people or you're done, right? And you got to fold, pick your toys and go home and fold the company. So that could be one of the tipping points.
Yeah,
but I also think Robert Herjavec appeared on PSW. I don't know how long ago. It was a great interview, right? But we talked about like there's a bottom to this at some point, and I think probably my prediction based on what Robert and Matt and people that follow this way more closely and way smarter than me about this, right? They kind of predicted like the bottom being some point this year. I think we'll start seeing it come out of this at some point. It may take another year from now until another year before things kind of settle out and we turn this around.
I'd like to think that Black Hat though is an arbitrary line in the sand for putting those deals together, because I don't think those business people that do that type of business for that funding stuff are folks that would be at Black Hat.
But there's a lot of accelerator program. There's a lot of activities that happen at Black Hat that are centered around funding, Larry. Yeah,
they are absolutely there. They're not. Yeah. They're not where you're going, Larry. You're going there for technical content or teaching a class or whatever. But in the God, I can't think of what it is. It's the startup rooms.
RSA has it too. Yeah, there's multiple programs where you can. It's almost like a contest, right?
Yeah.
Where like the winner gets funding like that. There's a lot of stuff happening like that.
Josh has participated in at least one of those, right?
Oh God, I've more than one. Good Lord.
Oh, but also there's an area at Black Hat that I participated in when I was helping John Strand with active countermeasures. In the first year you can do it once as a startup. And you can get a booth in the show floor. What's that called? Arsenal? No, it's not Arsenal.
Yeah. It is the Arsenal. I think you're right.
Arsenal, you can do it once.
It's crazy.
You can do it once.
Like a 2-foot table for $20,000 or something like that.
It was way cheaper.
2 feet of.
I don't want to say what it costs because honestly I don't remember, and I don't want to But they make it affordable that if you're a seed funded startup, for example, and you want to go to Black Hat, you want to exhibit, you get tower, like a 2 foot by 6 foot thing, and you stand there and you're on the show floor and you can talk. And you
do your pitch,
and you do your pitch. If you're a seed startup and you're looking for customers and you're going there and you don't get any customers, you may not be in business. If you're going there and you're like, I get customers, I can survive for another year and I'm good. Right?
You're looking for funding and customers. So if you're good, you can go there for funding and you can go there for customers. If you don't find either, if you don't, go for both. But if you don't find either, well, then it might be time to shut the doors.
Correct. And there's
Maybe your idea wasn't as good as you thought it was.
It could be, and that's totally fine.
So I have a thought, and I've had this thought for a long time. There's a disparity in our industry between the belief that technology will solve everything, and so if you want to get into cyber, you got to do a startup, you got to come up with the next big thing. But there on the flip side, there's also I'm not sure what the prevailing number is right now. Hundreds of thousands of job openings in cyber. One of the articles I think I put it in there is, the Biden administration came out with a declaration or position on trying to make sure that cybersecurity is available to everybody. There seems to be a disconnect between the need for cybersecurity professionals and organizations, people that are trained in cybersecurity, know how to evaluate whatever standard or regulations you want to follow, know how to do know what the table stakes are, and know how to implement them and know how to recommend them, versus the vast number of people in our industry that are doing startups and trying to build yet another product, I frankly go to all the Black Hats and the RSAs, and I wonder, when does this end? Don't we have enough products and tools out there? Is there anything really new coming, or are these all just variations on a theme?
No, I think it's a cycle, Jeff. I think it's a cycle. I think it's new companies, and they're addressing newer threats, newer solutions.
But not all of them.
And not all of them. And some of them will fall out. Some of them will be successful. Some of them will displace the category kings, although unlikely. But I think it's kind of a cycle, Jeff. You know what I mean?
I think it's been a cycle. but I'm not sure that cycle continues to cycle without there being, this whole idea of right sizing. Me being an old timer, most of the old timers I talk about, all this stuff that's been going on cyclically for how many years, 25, 30 years, and yet we're still bitching and moaning on this show how many times about how, our first segment with incident response, how many companies are being breached, and you're finding out that they're like, they're not doing the basics. Our guest on the first show, whose name escapes me right now, help me. Bill, he was talking about, you'd be surprised how many big companies go into that you assume they're doing all the right things. They're not. I mean that's the norm, and I think it's because all these companies and this whole industry is bought into the idea that technology and product or somebody else will take care of it. And if we're ever going to change, and if we're ever going to advance this thing that we call cybersecurity to most organizations, we have to embrace the fact that it takes people that are learned and have experience and know things and know how to get things done, given what they have, with or without all the technology tools and solutions that are out there that help them do their things. I think that's where Jeff, the gap is. And I don't know that.
But maybe, Jeff, we just need to not have people access the internet. I mean,
that could be
works for Google, right?
I don't know if it works for Google or not, but they put that forth. There was a report that Google is, and I quote, starting a new pilot program where some employees will be restricted to internet-free desktops while they work. So they'll have access to internal Google resources, but not the internet. I think there's a lot of directions we could take this, right? I think that I remember way back in the day hearing about how, and someone I think applying this somehow to my thoughts in the university, like what should have access to the internet from the internet in the university, because the assets that I was protecting in the university were very vulnerable. It was very much a soft, chewy inside, right, to that university. And so a lot of the thinking was restricting what had access to what, just to stop the bleeding. And I think it's interesting that like more than 20 years later, we're coming back to this idea that what if we just restrict what can talk to the internet and what can't as a security measure? And some of the models that I was going off of in the university, while not trying to be the militaristic style security in the university, but I did borrow from, and Jeff, I think you're probably familiar with this, right? Many of us probably are as well, that when you work in a military or government environment, you might have a computer that is connected to the internet, and you might have another computer that is not connected to the internet, and you can only do certain amount of you can do certain types of activities that deal with certain data classifications, top secret on this computer, and then this other computers and one's connected to the internet, right? And then there's, of course, we talked about ways to bypass that, how data was passed back and forth and such. But this kind of reminds me of that, right, Jeff?
Yeah, well, I predate the use of computers and certainly network computers. I mean, when I first started at NSA, we had a desktop computer. We weren't even networked, but we did have telephones, and we had the classified internal phone that we could use to call people within NSA, the gray phone. And then we had the unclassified phone, the black phone, that we could use to call outside. It's that concept. I remember in the early days, early 2000s, going to organizations where, me being a third party, a contractor, or whatever you want to call it, I wasn't allowed to, bring a phone in. And sort of predates the idea of a smart device, but then somewhere along the line, I had company issued phones that I could use for a long time, or I had my personal phone, but you would never dream 20 years ago of connecting to anything work related on your personal device. But how many of us now work for organizations where we're expected to have a personal device and we have to attach to email and other things, the internal directories and SharePoints and whatnot, and it's just part of business. I've never thought that was a good idea, but it was a financial, economic decision that was made long ago by many organizations. But maybe we can go back to those days of separating things. I personally think it's a Pandora's box, and that ship has sailed. I don't think we're ever going to get back to that. Maybe we should.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's a lot of isolation technologies like Bromium, right, that isolate processes and/or other solutions I've seen over the years that attempt to do that level of isolation, level of protection from the internet, in the fact that like your browser ends up being a virtual containerized instance that accesses the internet, like all these different technologies to separate your connectivity and data from the internet. The part gets tricky, right? Because if you need to download something from the internet and then transfer that to somewhere else, like, it's just a lot of issues with that. I think if we could have solved the security problem with isolation and network rules, like we very much tried in the 90s and early 2000s, that we would have continued down that path. But I think usability and the access to information kind of.
Let's cut to the chase. It's convenience, and it's cheaper for the organizations.
Correct.
At least
and easier to manage.
Even just working from home. I've been working from home for 25 years. The idea of there used to be estimates of what there's OSHA guidelines on how much physical space somebody had to have in a cubicle or an office space, which I worked for organizations that did and did not follow that. But then work from home, think of all the overhead, the costs associated with employing people, and organizations are struggling with this now with with the COVID work from home and post COVID. Do you go back to the office or not? And the ripple effect. I've been to cities where think of how many businesses, coffee shops, lunch shops, retail businesses that exist because there's so many people working in the buildings that come out and shop and want to eat or want to go to the bar afterwards for happy hour. And because those people aren't there, they're working remotely. How much of that is from an economic perspective, how many other businesses have suffered just because of the changing dynamics? It's very complicated.
It is. But it's interesting, the browser being one of the primary conduits that we've talked about for years that bad actors can use. And I think it's kind of ironic that recently I've added another layer of protection, if you will, to my browser. Because I actually published this in our internal Slack. There was an ad service, and I forget the domain, but it came back as shady. And there was a couple of news sites that were trying to load content from this particular ad provider that the browser was kind of freaking out about. It was like trying to open applications and doing kind of weird stuff. And I was like, that's so weird. I'm like, also, I run Linux, and everything I've read about this particular thing is targeted towards Windows. So well, at the first, I feel kind of good, but I don't feel kind of good because it's malicious content. And I don't care if it's targeted towards me or not, or my operating system or not. It's friggin' malicious content. And now I'm paranoid. And so I am using and have been using AdBlock Plus to block ads. Josh, going back to what you were saying about my, all my feeds and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a ton of different websites that I'm accessing on a daily basis. Therefore, my level of protection is I got to be aware. So AdBlock Plus, and then I recently added, actually based on Michael Bazel's recommendation, I added uBlock Origin, And there's a couple of different ones out there, so you got to make sure you get it right. What's this one called? uBlock.
I don't block nothing.
It's not ublock.org. It's uBlock Origin, which is slightly different, which isn't necessarily an ad blocker, but filtering out some more malicious behavior. And when I added uBlock something, let me go into my extension so I can tell you exactly what uBlock Origin. Yes, 1.5, 1.0. It basically calls itself a blocker, not an ad blocker, right? So it has a bunch of block lists that it implements. And since I did that, I didn't see what I thought was malicious content trying to be loaded from some of my sites. So in talking about like isolating yourself from the internet, I don't think that's a reality. I think many of us will agree that you can't tell people that work for your organization they can't access the internet because it's too dangerous. I think we're way past that point. Maybe Google can have a pilot program that does that, sure. But most organizations can't do that. But what we can say is, like, let's be more safe when we do browse the internet, right? So that's the one I loaded recently to get around some of the malicious content. Do you guys use any kind of, what do you use for safety in your browser?
Don't click shit.
Yeah. The other thing is don't click. But the thing is, I wasn't clicking shit. I was clicking shit in an article.
I'm on a Mac. I'm invincible.
Yeah. I'm on Linux. I'm invincible, right? No one makes like malware for Linux because no one uses it as a desktop. Like it's less than 1% that use it as an actual, a desktop. But I'm not banking on that for my security, right? Like I totally throw that out the window. And I was going to like big named websites, like very highly, what you would call, if you put that through any kind of domain name validation system of the reputation of the domain
would be off the chart.
The primary, or we're talking Bleeping Computer, Phoronix, like really big, huge, high traffic websites, but they're loading ad content. They don't know this is drive-by downloads. We've talked about drive-by downloads.
For like since we went in your basement. Since we were podcasting in your basement.
15 years ago, we were talking about drive-by downloads, right? Still a thing
because that happened on the New York Times websites through one of their third-party advertisers loading JavaScript.
And that I think that's what is happening. And I had to add uBlock Origin as well to have that extra. But the thing is, these websites are like, well, you can't have an ad blocker. And I'm like, well, fuck you, I can't have an ad blocker. Like, why don't you do a better job of filtering what ads are coming through your site? Yeah. Because obviously you're not doing a good enough job. I don't trust all the crap that you're loading on your site. The other hack that I have... you want to know the other hack I have to get around this?
Real quick. You can't have an ad blocker. That reminds me of the argument back in the day with the TiVo one at the 30-second skip.
Right.
Yeah, we're going to lose all this money because you skip through our commercials. And guess who has 30-second skip?
Right.
Every fucking DVR on the planet. Yeah.
The other one I like, if I load a site that has a lot of advertisements on it, just a lot of crap, like inline advertisements and stuff, like you just can't get around it.
Yep.
Postlight Reader. Postlight Reader is awesome. Like it basically turns that into a text document. Like you click the thing and it strips out a whole bunch of stuff and turns it into a text document. I'm like, I can read the article now. This is great. The only
thing that I'm finding is that I have a couple of other tools that I use that use like an API to a browser that you can't leverage the plugins in your browser.
Right.
For example, it has its own rendering engine. My RSS reader, for example.
Yes.
Reader.
That's why I switched to a browser-based reader for just that reason.
And you know what? I had been reticent about using browser-based apps for the longest time until a couple of weeks ago, and most recently I got a notification in, I forget, one of my Twitter apps, and X, Twitter, whatever, don't get me started.
Oh god.
That the app that I was using had an update to its UI, and I could go check out the new, and I could migrate from the old to the new. And I did. And so I was using Tweetin, and Tweetin uses TweetDeck. Is an API for TweetDeck. And I upgraded to the new TweetDeck. Tweetin now can't run because it needs the old version. So I went back to TweetDeck and I rolled it back to the old version. Despite me in the browser having the old version, tweeting won't load because it can't revert back. So guess what? No more tweeting, and I use TweetDeck in a browser. But be using Chrome, I can create a Chrome app.
Right.
There's effectively a single Chrome instance of that one web page with reduced browser options. I'm getting more sold on that. So,
let's talk about car thieves for a moment. I know, Jeff, this is your favorite topic,
and I think some other folks need to get ready to go too as well, including Aaron. So maybe close to our last ones.
I think our last story should be the 10 reasons to be optimistic about cybersecurity.
Yes. Let's talk quickly
let's
about
talk cars
Let's
first.
talk cars, and then I agree, Jeff. I liked your story, whatever number that was, 12.
My last story.
Yeah.
Cars.
So I actually watched this news clip of San Francisco.
The NBC Bay Area one.
It was just kind of it was disheartening for me to see a state and a city that has progressed to this level where crime is so like there's not enough deterrence for this type of crime that the advice has to be you can't have electronics in your car because someone will break into your car. But now it's even a more heightened level of risk that you can't have your electronics in your car because thieves are actually scanning your car for any kind of so if I were to do it, well, there'd be a lot of things that I would scan for, right? And they recommend you turning your devices off. And I question that because even an iPhone will still emit radio frequency transmissions when an iPhone is off.
Yep.
Right? I'm not wrong about that. It's still, even the phone is off, it will emit.
Yeah, they did find that happened, yeah.
Many of us on the
I
show.
literally have this on my desk.
Right? Like Josh, Larry, like a lot of us, like radio frequency transmissions is kind of like a labor of love for us. We've done it for a long time. That Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, cellular, LTE, 3G, 4G, 5G transmissions, Bluetooth low energy. Even when the iPhone is off, I still think it still. We covered the story a while ago, right? Even when it's off, I think it's Bluetooth BLE.
First up, why are you leaving your iPhone in the car?
Well, so I'll give you a scenario. You've got kids, 2, 3, 4, 5 kids, whatever.
Yep.
They've all got devices.
Yep.
Who can keep track of which kid left their device in the car or not? Like
Agreed.
Sometimes my kids will take a device, they'll have a phone, and like one of my youngest child, right, has a phone, but it's just Wi-Fi, right? And sometimes, like, dude, you're not paying attention. And they just take it with you in the car wherever you're going, and they just stuff it in the back of the seat. And you don't know.
Yep.
Right?
No, and you say that you bring that up, and I'm like, yep. Our youngest doesn't have a phone; they have an iPad. Dad, we're going to be in the car for 45 minutes. Can I bring my iPad so I can play some games or something? Yeah, absolutely fine. Entertain yourself. Like I understand it's not great to look out the window the whole 45-minute trip. It's boring. And then when we get somewhere, it's like, oh, hide your iPad.
Yeah.
Or bring it in where you're going,
but it's not really hidden because it's emitting some kind of radio frequency, which is what attackers or thieves, I should say, are scanning for in San Francisco. So when they go to break into a car, and I don't even say it's a break-in, because the news report is literally showing evidence of broken glass, both on the street and showing pictures of cars with broken glass. So this is not. It's interesting how there's a level of sophistication with the device that's used to discover RF transmissions from a device that's in the car. However, the actual theft is, when I find that, I just break the glass and it's a smash and grab, and I grab the device and go. Like they haven't figured out that you can wedge the car door open.
Well, it takes too long. Takes too long.
Put the little puffer thing,
takes too long.
Puffer thing, and then
way too long. You're already way past the smash and grab.
It's so okay, but that's a good.
By the time you have put this thing in and puffed it up, your window is already smashed and the device is gone.
Yeah.
You've taken away too long. But you don't. What? You don't care.
They don't care. So it's interesting that they don't care about evidence that they've been there.
Yeah. Why would you?
Right?
Because it's over so fast.
It doesn't matter. You're
Doesn't
gone.
matter.
You're gone. You're on to the next one. You're not going to get caught anyway. So no sense in hiding your tracks.
Yeah.
And I don't want to tell people how to break into a car, but I mean, I do, because I also want you to be aware to protect your own cars. And what Larry and I are talking about is if you were to lock your keys in your car, chances are there's a lot of different ways to unlock a car, right? But I truly believe the easiest way, and the way I've seen like AAA and roadside assistance services, they come in with you have a plastic wedge for like splitting wood.
Yep.
And they have wedges. It's a plastic wedge, and they shove that in the door to just open it up enough.
Yep.
So that they can put basically a deflated balloon, for lack of a better term, that they're then pump up, which opens it up a little more.
So you can put a thing.
So you can get a tool that basically a glorified coat hanger.
Yep.
Get a tool that goes in there and just pushes the lock to unlock.
You don't even need to push the lock. You hit the automatic door unlock.
Automatic door, again, depending on your vehicle. Right. You basically unlock the door with that device, and then the door is unlocked.
Right.
Now, there's no evidence that you've been there after that.
My day was just a coat hanger.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, arguably, there's no evidence.
A Slim Jim? They used to call it Slim Jim.
The little plastic thing wedged between the door can make some marks on your paint sometimes. And AAA has these things where they say they may cause some scratching and that type of stuff to your vehicle. But if you think about what it cost for the AAA service to come out, you're already paying for it. It's $60 a year.
Yeah.
And you wait and you come out because you don't want your vehicle damaged.
Correct.
Admittedly, you lock your keys in the car.
You could smash the window.
You find a rock, you smash the window, and then you go get the window replaced. Mm-hmm. What's that cost? It's a couple $100 for a window. It's a cost thing, and we do that because one, we don't want to have a rock in the car and might damage something on the interior, and you don't have to clean up the glass because now that's time.
Glass everywhere, dude.
And then you got to get the window replaced.
Well, the glass
there's going to be some time.
The glass is tempered, and it's meant to shatter into a million pieces so that you don't get hurt.
And now you've got glass all inside your door card, and you've got to take the door apart. So this is time and expense. But for someone who doesn't care about the time and expense and needs to be in and out, you throw a rock through a window.
Yeah, it's a
you don't care.
smash and
Have
grab.
you seen they don't use rocks. Have you seen the videos of the smash and grabs in San Fran? There were some videos of this.
Oh yeah, they
literally they pull up. They use a specific glass breaker hammer. Yep. Okay. Or a center punch, which is a spring-loaded pop done.
Yep.
You hit the glass, it shatters. Do you have to
hit the glass in the corner? Does it have to be in a corner? Or no, it doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't matter. You just hit the glass anywhere. I've done this. I was a fireman. Mm-hmm. You just hit the glass anywhere. On a side window, it shatters. The front and back. Mm-hmm. The back windows sometimes are
coated.
Laminated.
Mm-hmm.
But the windshield is always laminated. But you hit a side window, you lean in, they pull the seat open, check and see what's in the trunk. Then they reach in, grab what's in the trunk, and they're gone in under 30 seconds.
Mm.
So, wedge, open the door, that takes a minute. I can get another car in that time.
Or 3 minutes. And arguably what are the wedge is maybe $1.50 on Amazon for a pack. It's $3 for a pack of 2, and then the little balloon thing is like $20. You know what one of those little hammers cost? And you get one of those little hammers and you put it in your car.
The RF device is
the little hammer that can break this, which includes a seatbelt cutter, which you put in your car, so that in case you get in a rollover or you get underwater, you can get out, you can cut your seatbelt and that stuff. Mm-hmm. Those are what? $3 on Amazon, $5 for a pair, so you can put one in your wife's car.
Gotcha.
$3 tool on Amazon, next day, Prime, free.
But it goes back to the Kia Boys thing too, where
I primed some of those to Sam Estrella.
You gotta have access to you gotta unlock the vehicle or smash the window.
Yeah.
Right, in order to steal the car.
Yep.
And I guess if you're gonna smash the car up in the Kia Boys example, you're just smashing the window and unlocking it.
Yeah, who cares?
And then starting it and driving it.
It's not your car.
Who cares?
It's not your car.
In those
and
cases,
now you've got air conditioning.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah. Yeah, and
which is just awful, by the way. Obviously,
You're
this
so
is
depressing.
It is very depressing.
Let's talk about the optimism of cybersecurity.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the optimism so we can be further depressed.
And
10
call,
reasons.
and call it a night.
10 reasons for optimism in cybersecurity.
Which story of this?
I love
The
that
last
this is
story.
but I love that this is Jeff's story.
There's a certain irony here.
The most curmudgeon-y one out of all of us added a story this week. 10 reasons for optimism in cybersecurity. Jeff,
But
provide
did you read the 10 reasons?
Not all of them.
Well, yeah, it's a very dubious list, and I, the curmudgeon in me could probably debunk most, if not all of them.
I would say all of them.
Yeah.
How is number one leadership buy-in? How is that optimistic? Normally, you don't get leadership buy-in. The thing we struggle with most.
I think we're better, though. I think
we are better than we were before. We are better than
That's
we
a
were
good
before.
thing.
Marginally, but what drives, how many articles have we talked about tonight from Microsoft on down where we're questioning decision making, what went into the action or inaction of organizations. The leadership buy-in, I think, is coming from, within the last couple of weeks, I forget what federal thing, there was some sort of federal mandators or recommendation that came out saying that you need to have cybersecurity at the table in the boardroom. Okay, so that's how we're going to get leadership buy-in, and that's how we're going to change things.
Number 6 on this list is secure products, Jeff, and
we're not there yet either.
But we're getting better.
Wait. I think we have a banner moment for all of these 10, which is we're like 2% better, everybody. Yeah. Woohoo.
But 2% better is then better than 2%
I would
worse.
argue there's more insecure products coming out today than there are products that are in that 2% that are getting better. I really do.
Or worse.
Yeah, but then there's the things like the new Cult of the Dead Cow thing, Veiled, or Veiled, I don't know how to pronounce it, Veiled, which is a whole new framework they're releasing next week about making products fully encrypted end to end.
So social media encrypted end to end.
Yeah. Well, you can build anything you want on top of it.
Encryption solves everything. I don't know why we haven't adopted that earlier.
Encryption solves a hell of a lot of problems. I'll agree with you, Jeff, honestly.
I was being facetious.
I wasn't. No, in this case, it disallows the use of hyper-local advertising and data harvesting from social media. So this kind of idea will make products secure by design. And so to get secure products, you have to make them secure by design, because otherwise developers will build anything you ask them to as fast as they can, and security isn't even in their vocabulary.
You've made me optimistic, Josh.
Jeff, I hate to say this. You wanted to be this as an optimistic, end on a high note type of article, but I really feel like they're just blowing smoke up my ass.
Yeah,
I
agree.
I am definitely blowing smoke.
Yeah. The whole article. Jeff, I want to end on a crypto note. Speaking of things that'll solve all of our problems, and ciphers and encryption algorithms have been around since the dawn of time. I mean,
Julius Caesar.
Can we be
and before?
I mean, we can date it like really as far back as early civilization.
Yeah,
on this
recorded
planet.
history.
Yeah, recorded history, right? Pretty cool episode from Malicious Life. The Voynich manuscript.
Oh, yeah.
Have you heard of this before?
I have a copy of it.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
But this was I was hoping for some kind of resolution, right?
Nope.
But basically after 100, I think Rand Levy, who's awesome, prolific podcaster, great guy, is produced this episode and did a great job. But basically said at 100 years of looking at this particular manuscript, we really can't determine whether this is a new language, an actual form of communication and language, a made-up language, which he had another term for, which I can't remember, or is it some type of cipher? And like,
Right.
we haven't really been able to-
Or is it the writings of a madman?
or is it completely made up and is in a hoax? Like, he explored all these different avenues, and like, I was kind of fascinated. Like, I was hoping for like a resolution during this episode, and like, if you're listening to this episode for some type of resolution, you're not going to find it.
So
because we really don't know. I think it was kind of interesting.
So have you heard of it? Yes. For one of Christmas or something of the like, I actually bought Kristen a copy of the Voynich manuscript.
Yeah,
in really nice,
it's like a
done
whole
well stuff.
story
Because she
about
loves puzzles.
where it came from.
Yep.
Who owned it? Have you heard of this before, Jeff? I wanted to ask you about it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's numerous examples throughout time of, various things like what you're referring to that are, various book codes, various
Unbroken
messages
codes,
that have
right? Like NSA
unbroken codes,
but
and
NSA
ciphers.
tried to break. There was actual cryptographers that were working on breaking this for a period of time, like really smart ones that worked for NSA. I don't think they made much progress.
Well, I mean, one of the most contemporary examples, I don't know if it's the most contemporary examples, is the crypto statue that's in the
That it reminded me of that.
CIA headquarters.
Right.
Where there's 4 messages and 3 of them were broken rather quickly. The 4th message has never been broken, and it's been around for 25 years now. And
Are you talking about the sculpture?
Yeah.
Yeah, the sculpture.
Okay.
It's called Cryptos with a K.
Crypto, yeah.
And, so
Beautiful.
there,
It's absolutely beautiful.
No, wait. Where is
There
where is
are-
that sculpture? That sculpture is in a particular.
it's in the courtyard of CIA headquarters.
I
There's-
got you.
Yeah.
The building has an interior courtyard, and there's this whole layout that an artist did that included the sculpture. And over the years, he's gotten older. He expected that somebody was going to break the whole code and figure it all out. He's put out clues as to what. The problem is the 4th message is very short. It's only like 30 characters or something like that. And he said, these characters translate to this, and people still can't figure out what it is.
Wow.
So, but those are the exceptions to the rules. There's a lot.
Worst Wheel of Fortune episode ever.
Well, but they talked about aspects of cryptography and language, Jeff, that you have mentioned and others have mentioned on the show before. In that the frequency of words that occur in a natural spoken language, the probability of a letter, like the most frequently occurring letters, but also then whittling it down to this letter is typically this letter comes after that letter kind of thing. And even like knowing all of that with the computers we have today, no one's been able to interpret the Voynich manuscript, which is amazing.
Yep. So if
and that's.
Oh, sorry, Jeff.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm going to divert a little bit.
Jeff,
So I want
Jeff
you to
and then Larry.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, the essence of cryptanalysis is taking advantage of, the patterns and the tendencies of whatever the underlying language is. But English, as an example, the most common letter in the English language is E, and just the rules of. I used to see this all the time in the early days, even when I was still at NSA. A lot of really smart, Army sergeants and enlisted people would come up with pseudo random password generators, and they would want to make the passwords somewhat memorizable, and so they would follow sort of the basic rules. Like if randomly you selected a consonant, you would more often the next letter would be forced to be a vowel. And the fact that there's only 5 vowels out of the 26. So vowels are a thing. There's not a whole lot of words out there in the English language that don't have vowels in them. And
there are no words in the English language that don't have vowels in them.
Possibly.
There are no valid words that haven't been made
English.
up in English.
But then you have like ancient Hebrew, which had no vowels at all.
Sure.
And but patterns. The short, especially if the cryptograms that you would do in puzzle books and in the old days when there's newspaper publishing puzzles and cryptograms and crypto quotes and stuff like that, where they would preserve the word order. Well, if you've got a one-letter word, it's either an A or an I.
You're wrong.
Words,
there are
there's only so
120
many.
words without vowels.
In the English language?
According to this article, yes.
That aren't made up?
According to the internet.
Okay, so
it's possible.
And sometimes why, but there's apparently lexical words called tisk, 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 nth degree.
Right.
And if you, depending on how you count Y as a vowel, nymph, lymph, hymns, glyph, dryly,
that's a vowel.
script, sometimes Y.
Sometimes,
Apparently
I was going to say sometimes Y is what I was taught in school.
Y is
Yep.
definitely used as a vowel.
In those cases.
But I mean, but that's the essence of cryptanalysis is taking advantage of things like
What
those
you already
types
know.
of patterns and tendencies and things like that to try to guess what the underlying language is, which hopefully gives you an indication of what the key is or what the cipher algorithm is that you can start projecting out and guessing the next letters and the next words and things like that.
All right.
Yeah,
So,
but I think
it works most of the time.
I think in closing.
no, you
nope.
said me.
Okay, go ahead. Larry. Sorry.
And this will be quick. If you like puzzles, a fun one that you might want to check out is a book called The Secret, a treasure hunt, which was written by Byron Price. It was released in 1982. Effectively, what happened was Byron went and buried 12 crypts, mostly in the United States, and wrote a book about clues about where their location was. And if you discovered the location with this crypt, with the talisman in the crypt, you could present it to him, and he would provide you with a very substantial gem of significant value. The problem is that he died in 2005. And the estate took over the responsibility for honoring the terms of the treasure hunt, but he never wrote down the exact locations. So even the estate doesn't know where they are. And as of this point, of the 12 that were buried in 83 or earlier, only 3 have been found.
Wow.
Most recently, in 2019 in Boston, Massachusetts, on an episode of the Discovery Channel's Expedition Unknown.
Interesting.
Who previously featured the 2 other ones that had been found.
That is cool that they found one on the show. That is neat.
Yep.
I discovered this through some of my podcast listening. I just want to take a couple of minutes and maybe we talk about it in the next 2 to 3 minutes before we close out. Some cool podcast episodes. One was Joe Rogan had an interview with Mark Andreessen. They talked a lot about AI and the implications of AI. So you may not make those connections like, oh, the Joe Rogan podcast, I may listen to that, I may not. Mark Andreessen, what did he get to say about AI? Dude, the two came together and had an awesome discussion about AI. And if you're interested in that, I know many of us are interested in that in information security today. It's episode number 2010 of the Joe Rogan Experience. The hip hop podcast I mentioned earlier is called Fresh Era. If you search for Fresh Era, it's from a podcast studio called Stupid Fly. And they interview people like Del the Funky Homo Sapien and what was the one I was Pete Rock from Pete Rock and CL Smooth, and just awesome. I mean, awesome. Kid from Kid and Play was an awesome podcast episode. Amazing podcast episode. It was great. Just stories behind if you're old like we are, right? If you're in your 40s,
but not as old as Jeff.
Not as if you're in your 40s, you probably grew up around 90s hip hop, regardless of your race, color, creed, religion, whatever. You were in a 90s hip hop, like I am, and many of us. So great podcast. Darknet Diaries.
Everything is good there.
The latest one is Team Executor.
Ooh,
136.
Ooh.
Larry's always going ooh because he interviews the guy that got arrested that ran the forum site.
Yep, for Team Executor.
For Team Executor.
For the record, Team Executor was the first group to create original Xbox mods
and then Nintendo Switch mods.
Yep.
And the Switch mods is what got them in trouble.
Yep.
And
Because
so-
Xbox didn't know what the fuck to do about it.
I think you need a little background before you listen to this episode. The guy that ran the forum gets arrested. So and I wasn't sure what happened in the story, but I think it would have listened much better if I had known this person got arrested. And like the way he got arrested and what happened to him is really tragic, actually, because they kind of talked to him about like, he's not really doing bad things. Like the dude's running the forum.
Yep.
Like other people are doing the
bad things, and he happens to
Like,
be
even-
hosting the information.
But even air quotes bad things, because I've seen this and I've always wanted like an inside look. In episode 136 of Darknet Diaries gave me that inside look into, you can go on freaking Amazon and you can buy a device
Yep.
that emulates all these classic video games on various platforms.
Yep.
The Amazon's not getting in trouble for that.
Mm-hmm.
The Chinese manufacturer that's making these devices isn't getting in trouble for that.
Yep.
But like this dude got in trouble for that, and Jack interviewed him, which I thought was really interesting. And I feel really bad for this person. He's got to GoFundMe and everything. So I thought it was a really standout.
And that was not recently that happened.
It was over time. They talk about his whole, but I mean, they talk about
Like I was working in healthcare when that happened.
if you're doing hacker stuff, man, you're gonna pick out stuff. What is it? The PS1 Mini was like an emulated platform from Sony. Like if you're a gaming nerd, like Charles Schreier would be all over, and a lot of people that we know that are like into that gaming stuff would be all over this kind of stuff. But they kind of talk about like mod chips for your original Xbox, which I did some original Xbox hacking, right? Duck Sauce helped me out with some of that back in the day, right? There was games with exploits. There was mod chips.
I traded tattoo work for a modded Xbox back in the day.
The dude he interviews, and I forget his name, would desolder the flash chip from an original Xbox, reflash it, and solder it back onto the board. And said that was faster than any other method because he had it down to a science.
Yep. You do it enough times, yeah.
I was like, yeah, you got my respect now. I'm like, that's pretty fucking cool. We talk about hacking all kinds of devices now. Like, I thought it was pretty cool. So that's kind of like my podcast roundup of things that stood out. And again, Hacked Podcast, you got to listen to the Kia Boys. Great episode that published on July 1st. But if you haven't listened to it, make sure you go listen. So with that, thank you, everyone, for listening to this edition of Paul Security Weekly. Larry, take us out.
I was going to say, hey, Aaron, take us out.
Over and out.